So before we get into the results of the test, what I wanted to do is just explain a little bit about what we're actually testing. What I have here is a couple of quick drawings of a carbureted setup with a blow-through hat and a blow-through carb, and then a multi-point injection system with that same hat, and instead of a carburetor, this is a 4150 style throttle body. Also, what I want to do is explain a little bit about the divider inside of this hat and its main purpose. So before multi-point fuel injection became really popular, most guys would use a carburetor, and so your boost pressure or your air under boost would be fed through this hat down through the carburetor. Now the carburetor and fuel injection differ in one main way. The carburetor relies on pressure differential to mix the fuel with air. So in this setup, what happens is as air comes through this hat, it follows down to the lower pressure, which is underneath the throttle blades because of the pistons moving and creating a lower pressure. So the high pressure air feeds into the low pressure in the cylinders. And as air passes through these venturis in the carburetor, the fuel, which I have colored in red, is sitting in the carburetor. And as the pressure differential and the air comes through the venturis, it creates a low pressure here, which then takes fuel through the boosters and mixes with the air into the intake plenum and then disperses into the appropriate cylinder when the valves open. In the case of the hat, what happens is, and I'm no expert on airflow, there's people that are much smarter about airflow than me, but I'll give this in a very simple term. What happens is air, just like any other sort of fluid, is going to move in the area of least resistance, okay? So as air's coming in, it's rushing in, it doesn't want to turn this corner. It wants to continue to go straight or continue to follow the lower pressure area. So as this air comes in, what happens is the air tends to shoot and run into the back wall of this hat. By doing that, most of the air is trying to enter into the intake plenum through the secondary venturi of the carburetor. So what happens is you get a lot of fuel that builds up from this secondary and pours into the engine, and not as much because of, again, the air is tending to go this way rather than straight into this first venturi. So you have a very rich secondary and a quite lean in comparison primary. So once the fuel and air gets into the intake plenum, fuel, again, just like air, it doesn't want to turn this corner and come over to the front cylinders. So what happens is you get cylinders in the back that are rich, and you get cylinders in the front that are lean. So to combat that, what they do is they've added in a divider into this hat. By putting in this divider, like so, it tries to separate the air. So some of it comes and follows this path down the secondaries, and some of it comes down this path, runs into the divider, and is more likely to be fed into the primary side. So now, instead of having a very rich secondary and a lean primary, you equalize to a point the air that goes down each side of the divider, and now you have a more even air-fuel ratio going through the primaries and the secondaries. Now, in theory, that sounds great. However, again, airflow, if you've ever heard someone talk about the short side, what they're referring to is this area, the curve in the path of the wherever the air is going, whether it's an intake runner or in this case the hat. So this is a much sharper turn for the air to to transition from going straight and then making a 90-degree turn. And you can see this short side is a much more gradual turn. So this secondary still tends to flow more air because of the transition of that short side radius. Now, what we wanted to do is, in multi-point fuel injection, because the fuel is no longer being mixed with air up here above the throttle plates, what's happening is the fuel is now being injected directly into the intake runners, very close to where the intake valve is. So now we're not worried about, you know, rich secondaries and lean primaries. We just have air flowing through here, and then the fuel injector controls how much fuel is injected into each cylinder. So what we wanted to do is, in a multi-point injection system where we don't really need this divider to control the richness of the primaries and secondaries, we took and we blew out this divider. So now it's just one big open air hat. Now what we found is it didn't make any power difference whatsoever. So as far as it, you know, if you had a divider in here, it's really not, if you had a hat that had a divider, it's really not going to give you any sort of performance advantage of taking that divider out. Again, we saw no power difference, and this was an A to B test, same engine, same setup, the only difference being the carburetor and throttle body, and then again the same hat, just one with a divider and one without. So no power loss. And then the other thing we wanted to do as well is we took a pressure reading going into the hat. So effectively you can think of it, we're just measuring boost pressure, pressure coming into the hat, and then we also measured pressure underneath of the carburetor or throttle body to see if there's any sort of restriction here. So if we had a major restriction, we would see a higher boost pressure here and a lower pressure underneath the throttle body, or underneath the throttle plates when you're at wide open throttle. We didn't really see that. We did see a 1 psi difference between these two pressure readings. Again, there's other things that affect pressure, temperature, you know, fuel, that sort of thing. But so no big difference there. And we saw the same exact result on the multi-point, only 1 psi loss from the hat to the intake plenum.